This is the story of terror that no one survived to tell, because the story is not over. It is a story that unfolds in the silence between heartbeats, in the shadows that cling to forgotten places, and in the echoes of voices that never should have been. It began, as such things often do, with a simple, foolish idea and a car full of friends who thought they were invincible. The road died long before they reached their destination. It crumbled from cracked asphalt to gravel, then from gravel to a ghost of a path choked with weeds that scraped at the undercarriage of Maya's sport utility vehicle. Leo stared out the passenger window, watching the dense, monotonous green of the forest slide by. The air inside the car was thick with the scent of pine, cheap air freshener, and the faint electric tang of anticipation. "Are you sure this is it?" Ben's voice came from the back seat, tight with skepticism. He was hunched over a tablet, its screen reflecting a complex map of topographic lines. "According to the survey maps from 1988, we should have hit a primary access gate a mile back." "Relax, Benny," Maya said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel as she navigated a particularly nasty rut. "Decommissioned means decommissioned. They do not exactly maintain the welcome mat." Maya was the group's engine, always pushing, always seeking the next forgotten place on the map. Her enthusiasm was a force of nature, pulling the rest of them along in her wake. "She is right," Chloe added, her voice a soft counterpoint to Maya's brashness. She was sketching in a worn leather-bound book, her charcoal pencil dancing with a practiced grace that seemed at odds with their jolting ride. "The best places are always the ones that try to keep you out." Chloe was the artist, the empath, the one who saw the sad, derelict beauty in the ruins they explored. Leo remained silent, adjusting the focus on his camera. He was the archivist, the tech guy, the one who documented their expeditions with an almost obsessive level of detail. He saw things through a lens, a habit that gave him a comfortable, if artificial, sense of distance. Today, however, the forest felt too close, its immense, suffocating presence pressing in on the thin metal shell of the car. The trees were ancient and unnervingly tall, their canopy a dense mesh that swallowed the afternoon sun, leaving the forest floor in a perpetual twilight. Their goal was the Whisperwood Array, a place that existed more in rumor and redacted government files than on any modern map. Ben had unearthed its story from a series of declassified documents. It was a Cold War relic, a deep space radio observatory built in the late 60s, a cluster of colossal dishes designed to listen to the whispers of the cosmos. For 2 decades, it had operated in total secrecy until it was abruptly and inexplicably abandoned in 1989. The official reason was budget cuts and obsolete technology, but the numbers did not add up. The cost of the shutdown, the environmental ceiling, the sheer speed of its desertion. It was too expensive, too sudden. "The local folklore is juicier," Ben said, swiping a finger across his tablet. "They say the researchers heard something they were not supposed to. Something that was not from space. They called it the low hum. Some said it drove the director mad. He walked out into the woods one night and was never seen again. Of course, it is all just ghost stories. The best kind. Maya grinned, her eyes flashing in the rearview mirror. Leo felt a familiar prickle of unease. He did not believe in ghosts, but he believed in the power of suggestion. He believed in the way a story could plant a seed in your mind, a seed that could sprout into something dark and tangled when the lights went out. He raised his camera and took a photo of the road ahead, a tunnel of grasping branches and deep shadows. In the viewfinder, it looked like the throat of some great beast. They found the fence an hour later. It was a 10-foot-high chain-link barrier topped with rusted coils of barbed wire, a skeletal grey line swallowed by the encroaching wilderness. A faded, bullet-riddled sign clung to the fence. United States. Government property. No trespassing. The letters were peeling, the warning diluted by decades of neglect. "Well, that is our welcome mat," Maya declared, killing the engine. The sudden silence was immense, a physical weight that pressed on Leo's eardrums. It was not just quiet, it was a void. No birdsong, no insect chatter, just the whisper of the wind through the pines and the soft creak of the sport utility vehicle's cooling engine. Chloe was the first one out of the car, her sketchbook already in hand. She stood for a long moment, head tilted, as if listening to the silence itself. "It feels heavy here," she said, her voice barely disturbing the air. Leo felt it too. A static charge in the atmosphere, a sense of being watched by a vast, indifferent audience. He slung his gear bag over his shoulder, its weight a comforting, familiar burden. Inside was his camera, a high-sensitivity audio recorder, an electromagnetic field meter, and a dozen other gadgets that translated the world into measurable data. He trusted data. Data was clean. It was logical. It had no room for heavy feelings or phantom audiences. They found a breach 200 yards down the fence lane, where a great pine had fallen in a long-ago storm, crushing a section of the barrier. The metal was bent and twisted, an open wound in the facility's decaying skin. Maya slipped through first, nimble and sure-footed. Ben followed, more awkwardly, catching his jacket on a snag of wire. Chloe moved through with a dancer's grace, her eyes scanning the woods beyond. Leo came last, pausing to take a photo of the mangled fence, a perfect symbol of violated boundaries. The world inside the fence was a lost kingdom. The undergrowth was thicker, the trees taller, as if they had been allowed to grow wild and unchecked for a century, not just a few decades. A narrow service road, barely visible beneath a carpet of moss and pine needles, guided them deeper into the compound, and then they saw them. Rising above the canopy, stark and skeletal against the bruised purple of the late afternoon sky, were the dishes. There were 3 of them, each one 100 feet in diameter, a lattice of rusting steel and decaying mesh. They were monstrous things, tilted towards the heavens, like the bleached-out ears of dead gods, waiting for a message that would never come. Their scale was disorienting, dwarfing the trees and making the humans at their feet feel utterly insignificant. "My God," Ben breathed, his academic detachment dissolving into pure awe. "They are bigger than the reports suggested." Chloe was already sketching, her charcoal flying across the page, trying to capture the sheer, breathtaking immensity of the structures. Maya just stared, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "This is it," she whispered. "The jackpot." Leo felt a different emotion. It was not awe. It was a deep, primal dread. The dishes did not feel like scientific instruments. They felt like monuments to a forgotten, terrifying religion. They had a presence, a personality. They were waiting. The operations building was nestled at the center of the triangular formation of dishes. It was a low, brutalist structure of stained concrete, half swallowed by ivy and the grasping limbs of the forest. Its windows were dark, vacant eyes, and its flat roof was carpeted with a thick layer of moss. The air around it was cold, a pocket of unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the shade. The main doors were sealed with a heavy chain and a padlock so old it had become a single solid lump of rust. But Maya, ever resourceful, found her way in. A maintenance hatch on the roof, its hinges groaning in protest as she and Ben forced it open. The air that wafted up from the darkness below was stale and cold, thick with the smell of damp, decay, and something else. Something faintly metallic and bitter, like old blood or ozone. One by one, they lowered themselves into the blackness, their headlamps cutting sharp, dancing cones of light through the dust-filled space. They were in a utility corridor. Pipes and thick bundles of cables lined the walls, disappearing into the shadows. The floor was slick with condensation. Every sound was amplified, the drip of water, the scuff of their boots, the ragged sound of their own breathing. "Control room should be this way," Ben said, his voice a low murmur, consulting a schematic on his tablet that he had downloaded from the archives. He led them through a series of dark, echoing hallways. They passed empty offices, the floors littered with swollen, mouldy papers. They saw a laboratory, its counters covered in shattered beakers and strange crystalline growths of rust. They found a break room, a single, overturned coffee mug lying in the center of the floor like a casualty of some sudden, violent exodus. The place felt like a tomb, sealed not just against the outside world, but against time itself. The main control room was the heart of the facility, and it was a breathtaking sight. It was a vast, circular chamber, 2 stories high, with a domed ceiling. One entire wall was a star map, a mosaic of tiny lights, all of them now dark. The center of the room was dominated by a huge, horseshoe-shaped console, studded with hundreds of buttons, switches, and dials, all of them coated in a fine layer of grey dust. Cracked monitors stared blankly from their housings. It was a shrine to a dead technological age. "This is incredible," Leo said, his earlier dread momentarily forgotten in the face of such a perfectly preserved ruin. He unslung his bag and began setting up his equipment, placing his audio recorder on the center of the main console. He switched it on, the small digital display glowing to life, a tiny beacon of modernity in the analog crypt. "I am going to check out the lower levels," Maya announced, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Server rooms, generator access, see what is left of the guts." "I will go with you," Ben said quickly, not wanting to be left alone. "The schematics show a mainframe hub directly below us." Chloe wandered over to the dead star map, her fingers tracing the faint outlines of constellations. The quiet is different in here, she murmured. Outside it was heavy. In here it is listening. Leo did not answer. He was busy calibrating his electromagnetic field meter, sweeping it around the room. The needle stayed stubbornly at 0. No stray electromagnetic fields. The place was as dead as it looked. He left the meter on the console next to his audio recorder and began taking photos, documenting the decay, the silent consoles, the palpable sense of abandonment. Maya and Ben's footsteps faded as they descended a metal staircase in the corner of the room. He and Chloe were alone. The only sounds were the click of his camera's shutter and the whisper of her pencil on paper. He moved around the perimeter of the room, his lens capturing the details. A faded calendar on the wall, permanently turned to October 1989. A yellowed logbook left open on a desk, its ink washed out and illegible. A fine, powdery layer of dust that coated everything like funeral ash. He was focusing on a bank of magnetic tape reels when he heard the sound. It was a deep, resonant boom that vibrated through the concrete floor, a sound of immense weight and finality. It came from the direction Maya and Ben had gone. Leo froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. Chloe gasped, her head snapping up, her eyes wide with alarm. "What was that?" she whispered. "Maya? Ben?" Leo called out, his voice sounding small and thin in the cavernous space. Silence. The echo of his own voice was the only reply. "Maya?" he shouted, louder this time, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. Then he heard footsteps, frantic and hurried, clattering up the metal stairs. Maya appeared first, her face pale, her usual bravado gone. Ben was right behind her, his eyes wild, his tablet clutched to his chest like a shield. "A door," Maya panted, leaning against the railing. "A big, steel fire door. It just slammed shut." "It was not a draft," Ben added, his voice shaking. "I have explored dozens of these places. Buildings settle, things fall. This was different. It was deliberate, like something threw it shut." Leo felt the cold dread from earlier return, flooding his veins. He glanced at his electromagnetic field meter. The needle was still at 0. "You are sure?" "I am sure," Maya said, her jaw tight. "It is a 20-ton blast door. The kind they use to seal nuclear reactors. It would not just swing shut." They stood in silence for a long moment, the 4 of them clustered in the center of the dead control room. The building felt different now. It was no longer a passive ruin. It felt active, malevolent. "Maybe we should pack it in for the day," Ben suggested, his gaze darting nervously into the shadowed corners of the room. "We can come back tomorrow, in the daylight." "No," Maya said, her composure returning, her fear hardening into defiance. "No, we are not getting chased out by a spooky noise. It is an old building, that is all. Let us stick together, finish the sweep up here, and then we will figure out our next move." Her words were meant to be reassuring, but they fell flat. The spell of the adventure was broken. Something was wrong with this place, and they all knew it. Leo walked back over to his equipment, his mind racing. A draft, an old mechanism failing, a seismic tremor. He cycled through a list of rational explanations, but none of them felt right. The sound had been too clean, too powerful. He picked up his audio recorder to check the levels. He rewound the last few minutes, listening through his headphones. There was the sound of his camera shutter, Chloe's sketching, his own footsteps. Then there was the boom, a deep, percussive shock that overloaded the microphone, followed by the faint sound of their own panicked voices. It was exactly what he expected to hear. He was about to turn it off when he noticed something on the timeline. A few minutes before the door slammed, a small, almost imperceptible spike in the waveform. Curiosity overriding his fear, he isolated the section of audio. It sounded like a burst of low-level static, probably just interference from some of Ben's gear. He ran a simple noise cancellation filter, the kind he used to clean up wind noise or background hum. He increased the gain, amplifying what was left. He put the headphones back on and pressed play. He heard it. It was faint, buried deep in the recording, but it was undeniably there, a series of rhythmic, complex clicks. It was not mechanical. It sounded organic, like an insect chittering, but deeper and guttural. Underneath the clicking, almost woven into it, was another sound, a soft, sibilant whisper. It was not a human voice. The cadence was wrong, the pitch fluctuating in ways no human larynx could manage. He could not make out words, but the sound itself felt ancient and deeply intelligent. He ripped the headphones off, his skin crawling, his breath hitched in his throat. The sound had been on his recorder, captured in the moments before the door slammed. It had been in the room with them, silent to their ears but not to the sensitive microphone. "Leo, what is it? You look like you have seen a ghost," Chloe said, walking towards him. He could not speak. He just shook his head, his mind reeling. He needed to be rational. It was radio interference, a stray signal from a satellite bouncing off the old dishes. It had to be. He did not want to tell the others, not yet. It would only feed their growing panic. He needed more data, a second reading, proof. "It is nothing," he lied, his voice strained, just a feedback loop on the recorder. The sun was beginning to set, the light filtering through the grimy windows of the control room turned from grey to a deep, bloody orange, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and crawl along the floor. The temperature in the room had dropped noticeably. "Okay," Maya said, her voice firm, taking charge again. "It will be dark soon. It is too dangerous to try and hike back to the car now. We will set up a base camp here for the night. It is the most defensible spot. We will block the stairwell and the door to the corridor. We will be safe here." No one argued. The thought of navigating the dark, oppressive forest was far more terrifying than staying inside the concrete tomb. They used some fallen metal cabinets and heavy chairs to barricade the entrances to the control room, creating a flimsy but psychologically comforting barrier against the rest of the building. They sat together in the center of the room as darkness consumed the world outside, their headlamps and a couple of powerful lanterns creating a small, fragile island of light in an ocean of black. They ate their rations in near silence, the spell of their adventure utterly shattered, replaced by a tense, gnawing anxiety. It was Ben who noticed it first. He was looking at one of the few windows that was not completely opaque with grime, a high window that offered a sliver of a view of the sky and the top of one of the giant radio dishes. "That is strange," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "What is?" Leo asked, his nerves already frayed. "The dish," Ben said, pointing. "It is moved." Leo, Maya, and Chloe all turned to look. It was true. Earlier, Leo had taken a photo of that exact dish. It had been angled at about 70 degrees, a silent sentinel pointed at the zenith. Now, its angle was much lower, perhaps 45 degrees. It had tilted, its vast skeletal face now aimed towards the eastern horizon. "No," Leo said, shaking his head, a cold denial washing over him. "No, that is impossible. The power has been off for 30 years. The motors are seized. The brakes are rusted solid. It cannot move." "Maybe a structural failure," Ben offered, though his voice lacked any conviction. "Gravitational creep. The whole structure is probably unstable." He was already pulling up the schematics on his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen, looking for a rational explanation that he clearly did not believe himself. There are manual locks, but they would require a team of engineers and a crane to release. "It moved," Chloe said softly, her voice filled with a dreadful certainty. "I saw it just a little while ago. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me." A profound and terrifying silence fell over the group. The last vestiges of their rational world were crumbling away. A massive steel door slamming shut could, with a great deal of imagination, be explained away. A strange noise on a recorder could be interference, but a 2,000-ton structure of steel and concrete moving on its own, silently, in the deepening twilight. There was no explanation for that. The building no longer felt just active, it felt awake, and it was listening. Leo sat with his back against the cold metal of the main console, his headphones on, his audio recorder running. He was listening, not to a playback, but to the live feed from the microphone. The oppressive silence Chloe had mentioned earlier was gone. It had been replaced by something else. It was just at the edge of his hearing, a subtle texture to the air itself, a low subsonic hum that seemed to emanate from the very concrete beneath him. And within it, if he concentrated, if he strained to listen past the pounding of his own heart, he could hear it again, faint, intermittent, but there, a soft, sibilant whisper. It was not in the headphones this time. It was in the room. It was all around them. The nightmare had not just begun. They were inside it. The walls were closing in. The silence that followed Chloe's observation was different. It was a brittle, fragile thing, stretched taut over a chasm of unspoken terror. The four of them stood frozen in their small circle of lantern light, staring at the high window as if the dish might move again. However, it remained still, a dark scythe against a sky now studded with the first cold stars. The movement itself had been horrifying. A structure of that magnitude, should have screamed in protest, its rusted joints and seized motors groaning. Instead, it had slid into its new position with the noiseless grace of a predator. "It is impossible," Leo whispered, the word a prayer against the reality he was seeing. He fumbled for his camera, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He raised it and took another photo of the dish, his mind needing the mechanical act of documentation to process the impossible. He had a before and an after, proof, but proof of what? That the laws of physics had been suspended within the confines of Whisperwood's fence. "No," Ben said, his voice a dry rasp. He was staring at his tablet, his face illuminated by its cold blue light. Not impossible, just improbable. He tapped the screen with a trembling finger. The array was designed for micro-adjustments, powered by electromagnetic drivers in the base. They could be engaged with almost no sound, but they would need a colossal amount of power. The equivalent of a small town's grid for a single minute of operation. "The generators are dead, Ben," Maya stated, her voice flat and hard. "The fuel lines were cut 30 years ago. We saw them. There is no power." "I know," Ben said, not looking up. "That is the improbable part." The whispers chose that moment to return. Before, it had been a subtle thing, a faint sibilance at the edge of hearing that could be dismissed as the wind or the rustle of their own clothing. Now, it was undeniable. It was not coming from any single direction. It was simply there, a new component of the room's atmosphere, like the cold or the dark. It was a soft, dry, overlapping hiss, like sand skittering across a tomb floor or the shedding of a million insect wings. It seemed to emanate from the silent consoles, to bleed from the very concrete walls. Chloe clamped her hands over her ears, her eyes shut tight. "Make it stop," she whimpered. Leo instinctively reached for his audio recorder, his technician's mind clicking into gear. He needed to capture it, analyze it, break it down into frequencies and waveforms. He slipped his headphones on. The sound was a roaring torrent in his ears, 1,000 voices whispering at once, none of them human. The cadence was all wrong, too fast, too complex, filled with clicks and guttural stops that had no place in human speech. It was a language, he was certain of it, but one designed for an entirely different kind of biology. He felt a wave of vertigo, a sense of his own mind being stretched and pulled apart by the alien grammar of the sound. He tore the headphones off, gasping. "It is everywhere," he stammered, looking at the others. "It is not just a sound. It feels like it is trying to get in." Maya's face was a pale mask of determination. Fear was radiating from her in waves, but she was fighting it, compressing it into a hard diamond of resolve. "Everybody calm down," she ordered, her voice a little too loud. "It is auditory pareidolia. The building is making noises, and our brains are trying to turn it into patterns, voices. It is a trick of the mind." But no one believed her, least of all herself. The whispers were too complex, too rhythmic. They were intentional. Hours passed. The small circle of light from their lanterns seemed to shrink, pushing back a darkness that felt solid and menacing. No one spoke. They were trapped in a state of hypervigilance, every nerve ending screaming, every muscle tensed for a threat they could not see. The whispering continued its incessant, maddening monologue, a constant pressure against their sanity. Ben had retreated into his research, his face buried in the schematics and documents on his tablet. He muttered to himself, cross-referencing declassified files with the building's layout. The low hum, he murmured. They never defined it, just referenced it. Anomalous acoustic phenomena. They tried to triangulate the source. The readings were always inconsistent. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. Chloe sat with her back against a dusty server rack, her knees pulled up to her chest. She was sketching, but not in her usual fluid way. Her movements were jerky, frantic. The charcoal pencil scratched and tore at the paper. Leo glanced over her shoulder once and immediately wished he had not. It was not the building she was drawing. It was a shape, a chaotic scribble of intersecting lines and impossible angles, something that seemed to twist and writhe on the page. It had no discernible form, yet it radiated a sense of profound malice. At its center, she had drawn a single, dark, circular eye. Leo, meanwhile, tried to find solace in his own equipment. He set up a makeshift listening post on the central console. He ran the live audio feed from his recorder into his laptop, the screen displaying the sound as a complex, jagged waveform. He tried to apply filters to isolate a single voice from the cacophony, but it was like trying to catch a single drop of water in a storm. The sound was a unified whole, a single entity speaking with 1,000 mouths. He activated his electromagnetic field meter again. This time the needle was not still. It was twitching, jumping erratically in time with the rhythm of the whispers. A tiny, frantic dance of man-made measurement trying to quantify the incomprehensible. It was Maya who was having the hardest time. She had no technology to hide behind, no art to retreat into. She was a creature of action, and there was no action to be taken. She paced the perimeter of their small encampment, from the barricaded door to the blocked staircase, checking and rechecking their flimsy defenses. Her footsteps were the only other sound in the room, a restless, rhythmic counterpoint to the whispers. She was a caged animal, and the cage was shrinking. "There has to be a way to shut it off," she said suddenly, her voice raw. She was staring at the main console. This was a communications array. It received signals. It broadcast them. What we are hearing may be just a recording, a signal they captured that has been stuck on a loop for 30 years. "There is no power, Maya," Leo said, not looking up from his laptop. "The tape drives are dead. The hard drives are scrap metal. Nothing is running. Then we will find the speakers, the source of the sound. We will smash it with a rock if we have to." "There are no speakers," Ben mumbled from his corner. "The original design logs are fascinating. They did not use conventional audio transducers. The entire building was designed as a resonance chamber. They used a series of low-frequency emitters embedded in the foundation. They could generate sound that seemed to come from nowhere, from the air itself." He finally looked up from his tablet, his eyes wide and unfocused. "They built this place to listen, but they also built it to speak." A new quality entered the whispers then, a change in pitch, a subtle shift in rhythm. It was a focused, directed sound, and it was coalescing. The 1,000 hissing voices were weaving together, forming a single, complex thread of sound. It was aimed at the center of the room. It was aimed at them. And then it spoke. It was a single word, dragged from the chaos of the whispers. It was not a human voice. It was a grotesque mosaic of sound, the grinding of stone, the hiss of steam, the wet tearing of flesh, all forced into the shape of a word. The word was a name. Chloe. The sound slammed into them, a physical blow. Chloe screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure terror. She scrambled backwards, dropping her sketchbook, her hands flying to her face. The book fell open on the floor. In the lantern light, Leo could see her last drawing. The chaotic shape had resolved itself. It was a long, spindly limb, like that of a spider, ending not in a claw, but in something that looked disturbingly like a human hand. The other three were paralyzed. Hearing that impossible voice speak a name, her name was a violation. It was an intelligence demonstrating its knowledge. It knew them. It had been watching, listening, learning. How? Maya breathed, her face ashen. How does it know her name? Before anyone could answer, a new sound began. A sound from outside their sanctuary. It came from the corridor beyond the barricaded door. It was a slow, heavy scraping. The sound of something dense and solid being dragged across the concrete floor. It was accompanied by a wet, clicking noise. Scrape, click, scrape, click. It was moving. It was in the building with them. And it was coming closer. Ben, the schematics, Leo said, his voice a choked whisper. What else is on this level? What is in that hallway? Ben fumbled with his tablet, his fingers slipping on the screen. Offices, a records room, a biological lab. The scraping stopped. It stopped directly outside their barricaded door. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. They held their breath, their hearts hammering in a frantic, syncopated rhythm. The whispers inside the room had faded, as if the entity was focusing its attention, holding its own breath. A single loud thump echoed from the door. Not a knock, a heavy, wet impact, as if something had been thrown against it. Chloe let out a choked sob. Maya grabbed a heavy metal pipe she had pried from a wall panel earlier, holding it like a club, her knuckles white. They waited. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Nothing happened. The scraping sound did not return. The silence deepened, pressing in on them. It is gone, Maya whispered after a long, agonizing minute. It is testing us, Leo said, his mind racing. It is seeing how we react. It is a probe. First the door downstairs, now this. He felt a cold, academic clarity cutting through his fear. They were lab rats, and something was running an experiment. It was then that Ben made a small, strangled sound. He was not looking at the door. He was staring at the far wall of the control room, at the giant, dead star map. Oh no, he breathed. No, 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 no. Leo followed his gaze. His blood went cold. The map, a vast mosaic of thousands of tiny, dead fiber optic lights, was no longer completely dark. In the upper left quadrant, in a section that corresponded to the local star cluster, a single pinprick of light was glowing. It was a soft, sickly green, a beacon of mold and decay in the electronic graveyard. "One of them is on," Maya said, her voice trembling. "That is not a star," Ben whispered, his face a canvas of pure horror. He pointed a shaking finger at the glowing light. "I have been studying these maps for a month. That is not an astronomical position. The star charts are overlays. The primary function of that board was internal tracking. It mapped every piece of equipment, every sensor, every terminal in the entire facility." He looked at them, his eyes hollowed out by a terrible understanding. "That light," he said, his voice cracking. "That is the location of the main transmitter, the one in the central dish. The big one, the one that had moved." The whispers surged back into the room, louder this time, insistent, almost triumphant, and within the cacophony, Leo could hear a new sound beginning to form. It was not a word. It was a low, resonant hum, a vibration that started in his teeth and spread down his spine. It was the sound of a machine waking up, the sound of a vast and ancient piece of technology, dormant for 3 decades, being slowly, impossibly brought back to life. They were not just being haunted, they were witnessing a prelude. Something was using the array. It was preparing to make a call, and they were trapped at the heart of the machine. The hum was no longer just a sound, it was a physical presence. It burrowed into their bones, a deep cellular vibration that made their teeth ache and their vision swim. It was the sound of immense power awakening, the thrum of a forgotten god stirring in its sleep. The single green light on the star map pulsed in time with the hum, a steady hypnotic heartbeat that seemed to draw all the light in the room towards it, leaving the corners in a deeper, more profound darkness. The chaotic symphony of whispers resolved into a single focused stream of sound, a sibilant chorus directed at Ben. It coiled around him like a snake, a sound that was both a question and a demand. It did not speak his name, but the intent was clear. It was interrogating the archivist, the one who understood the machine it was inhabiting. Ben stumbled back, dropping his tablet. The screen shattered, the schematics vanishing into a spiderweb of fractured light. He clapped his hands over his ears, but it did no good. The sound was inside his skull. "It is reading him," Leo said, his voice a ragged gasp. "It is in his head. It is looking for something." Maya snapped. The paralysis that had gripped her shattered into 1,000 pieces of pure animal rage. "No," she snarled, her eyes blazing in the lantern light. She snatched up the iron pipe she had been holding. "I do not care what it is. We are not its lab rats." She advanced on the main console, the epicenter of the hum. "We have to break it. We have to get to that transmitter and destroy it before it finishes whatever the hell it is doing." "No, wait," Ben cried out, his face contorted in pain. He lowered his hands, his eyes wide with a terror that was deeper than just fear of the unknown. "You do not understand. It is not just a transmitter. It is a key, an amplifier. The array does not just listen to space. It listens to everything. The documents I read, they mentioned quantum entanglement, resonant frequencies. They were not just listening for radio waves. They were listening for echoes, for ghosts in the static. "What are you talking about, Ben?" Leo demanded, grabbing his friend's shoulder. "This place is a giant antenna, but not for space," Ben gasped, struggling to form the words as the whispers probed at his thoughts. "It is for another place, another dimension, right on top of us. The low hum is the sound of that place bleeding through." The researchers did not just hear it. They opened a door, and now it is trying to open it again. From this side, the hum intensified, a deep, resonant chord that made the metal floor beneath them vibrate. On the console, a series of small, unlabeled lights began to flicker on, one after another, a cascade of amber and red. The machine was moving through its startup sequence. Chloe, who had been huddled in the corner, silent and still, suddenly began to move. She retrieved her sketchbook and her piece of charcoal, her movements unnervingly fluid and precise, as if she were a puppet on a string. Her eyes were unfocused, looking at something in the empty air in front of her. She began to draw, her hand flying across the page with a speed and certainty that was terrifying. "Chloe, stop," Leo said gently, taking a step towards her. She did not seem to hear him. A single, guttural word escaped her lips, a sound that was not hers. "Ismek." The hum in the room faltered for a single, jarring beat. The whispers fell silent. Every eye turned to Chloe. "What did you say?" Maya asked, her voice a tense whisper. Chloe blinked, her focus returning. She looked down at her sketchbook as if seeing it for the first time. A shudder racked her body. "It has a name," she said, her voice trembling. "It is what the director called it, the one who disappeared. It showed me." She turned the sketchbook around. The drawing was a masterpiece of horror. It was the control room, rendered in perfect, terrifying detail. But they were not alone. Standing before the main console, its long, spindly fingers resting on the controls, was a figure. It was tall and emaciated, its limbs too long, its joints bent at unnatural angles. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, pale expanse of skin. But its shadow, cast on the floor by the lantern light, was a chaotic, writhing mass of feelers and claws and grasping appendages. The drawing conveyed a horrifying truth. The thing itself was just a projection, a lure. The real monster was its shadow. "It is a lie," Chloe whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It cannot touch anything. Not really. It needs the machine. The machine is its hands, its voice." As if in response to her words, the dead monitors around the console flickered to life. They did not show static or data. They glowed with the same sickly green light as the indicator on the star map. On their screens, complex geometric patterns bloomed and twisted, shapes that defied Euclidean geometry. Looking at them was painful. They seemed to fold in on themselves, creating an illusion of infinite depth that made Leo's head spin and his stomach churn. One by one, the monitors changed. The impossible patterns were replaced by text. It was not a language they recognized. The characters were alien, a mix of sharp angular lines and soft curving runes. Then the central monitor, directly in front of them, went blank. A single word appeared, typed out in a clean sans serif font. Albright. Ben recoiled as if he had been struck. Dr. Albright, he breathed. That was the name of the director, the one who walked into the woods. The word vanished, replaced by a new line of text. He opened the door. Another line appeared beneath it. He became the key. The text faded, and an image resolved on the screen. It was a grainy black and white photograph, a security still from the facility's last day of operation. It showed a man in a lab coat, his back to the camera, standing exactly where the figure in Chloe's drawing stood. He was facing the main console, his arms outstretched. The date stamp in the corner read, October 28th, 1989. The implications were staggering. Albright had not just walked away, he had fed himself to the machine. He had become the focusing agent, the biological component that allowed the entity to interface with the array, and now it was using his mind, his memories, his name, to taunt them. "This is insane," Maya said, shaking her head as if to clear it. "We have to get out of here." "No. Out where, Maya?" Leo shot back, gesturing at their barricades. "That thing is in the hallways. We are trapped." "The tunnels," Ben said suddenly, his mind latching onto a practical problem. A lifeline in the sea of madness. He scrambled for his shattered tablet, relief washing over his face as the screen flickered back to life, though cracked. There is a network of maintenance tunnels under the entire facility. They connect the 3 dishes to the central building. "We can get to the main dish without going through the main corridors." He pointed to a spot on the schematic near the metal staircase. "There is an access hatch right there." The decision was made without another word. Staying in the control room, the entity's throne room, was a death sentence. Their only chance was to move, to go on the offensive, to get to the heart of the transmitter and somehow, impossibly, shut it down. They gathered their gear, stuffing rations into their pockets, checking the batteries in their headlamps. The hum was rising in pitch now, a keening whine that spoke of a process nearing completion. The whispers had returned, a frantic, excited chatter. Maya and Leo went to the barricaded staircase. They began pulling away the heavy cabinets they had wedged against the door at the bottom. The metal screeched in protest, the sound unnervingly loud in the tense silence. They had just cleared the final obstruction when a new sound began, a sound that froze the blood in their veins. It came from the main doors on the other side of the room, a deep, resonant thud, and another. It was not the scraping sound from before. This was a series of rhythmic, powerful impacts. Something was trying to get in. Something huge and heavy. Thump. A visible dent appeared in the center of the heavy steel doors, the metal groaning. Thump. The hinges shrieked, pulling away from the concrete frame. "It knows we are leaving," Leo yelled over the noise. "Go! Go now!" Ben was already at the access hatch, a square of steel set into the floor. He heaved at the recessed handle, his face red with exertion. It would not budge. "It is rusted shut." Thump. The doors buckled inward, a crack of absolute darkness appearing at the top, a low, guttural growl. utterly unlike the whispers echoed from the hallway beyond. This was not the ethereal entity from the machine. This was something else, something physical, something it had found or made in the dark, forgotten corners of the facility. Maya ran to Ben's side, jamming the end of her iron pipe into the seam of the hatch. Together, she yelled. She and Leo put their full weight on the pipe, using it as a lever. Metal screamed as rusted bolts sheared. The hatch flew open with a deafening clang, revealing a dark square hole from which a smell of stagnant water and cold earth wafted up. A rusted iron ladder descended into the blackness. Chloe was already scrambling for the opening, her face a mask of primal fear. She practically threw herself onto the ladder and disappeared into the void below. Ben was right behind her. Thump, boom. With a final explosive crash, the main doors were ripped from their hinges and thrown into the room as if they were made of cardboard. Standing in the jagged opening, silhouetted against the profound darkness of the corridor, was a shape. It was huge, filling the entire doorway, a grotesque parody of the human form. It was hunched and asymmetrical, with limbs that were too long and moved with a sickening, jerky motion. It was the thing that had been dragging itself through the halls, and it was here. "Leo, go," Maya screamed, shoving him towards the hatch. Leo did not hesitate. He swung his legs into the opening, his feet finding the top rung of the ladder. He looked back just once. Maya was standing her ground, the iron pipe held in a two-handed grip, her body braced between the creature and the escape route. She was buying them time. The thing in the doorway took a shambling step into the control room. Its wet, clicking footsteps echoed on the concrete. Leo could not see its face, but he saw the glint of the lantern light on something slick and black that covered its body. "Maya, come on," he yelled, his voice cracking with terror. She took one step back, then another, never taking her eyes off the creature. Then she turned and vaulted into the hatch, her feet hitting the ladder just below him. The moment she was clear, Leo reached up and grabbed the heavy steel hatch cover. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, he and Maya pulled it shut. The world was plunged into absolute suffocating darkness, and the clang of the closing hatch was followed by a sound from above, a furious, bestial roar of frustration, and the deafening crash of 1,000 pounds of flesh and bone slamming against the steel just inches above their heads. They were safe, for now. But they were no longer just trapped in a haunted building. They were being hunted. The darkness was absolute. It was a physical, smothering weight. A thick, velvety blackness that swallowed sound, thought, and courage. For a long moment, there was nothing but the frantic, ragged panting of 4 people crammed onto a narrow iron ladder, and the deafening thunder of their own blood in their ears. The furious, bestial roar from above the hatch was gone, but the echo of it seemed to have been hammered into the silence. The air was cold and heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth, rust, and the cloying, sweet scent of decay. It was the smell of a place that had not breathed for 30 years. Leo felt Maya's feet just inches from his face, her boots digging into the rung beside his hands. Below him he could hear Ben's panicked, shallow breathing and Chloe's terrified, whimpering sobs. The steel of the ladder was slick with condensation and felt colder than ice against his skin. The hatch much cover above them. Their only shield against the monster in the control room was a thin plate of steel in a universe of concrete and earth. Lights, Maya's voice cut through the darkness, a harsh, strained command from above. Now, there was a fumbling, a series of frantic clicks, and then 4 beams of light sliced through the oppressive black. The effect was dizzying. The world resolved into a narrow, vertical shaft of rust-stained concrete. Thick bundles of black cables coated in a white, chalky mold snaked down the walls like petrified vines. The ladder seemed to descend into an infinite, shadowy drop. The sudden light was a relief, but it also revealed the truth of their situation. They had escaped the control room only to imprison themselves in the bowels of the earth. "Everyone okay?" Leo called down, his voice trembling. A choked "yes" came from Ben. Chloe just made a small, wounded sound. "Down," Maya ordered. "Slowly. Watch your footing." They descended, their headlamps creating a chaotic dance of light and shadow on the grimy walls. The shaft was tight, their shoulders brushing the concrete on either side. Every sound was magnified. The scrape of a boot on metal, the creak of the ancient ladder under their combined weight, the constant rhythmic drip of water from some unseen source. The farther down they went, the stronger the smell became, a rich, loamy odor mixed with the sharp tang of ozone. The ladder ended on a narrow concrete platform, slick with slime. Before them, a low, arched tunnel stretched into the darkness, just tall enough for them to stand upright if they stooped. Water pooled on the floor, and a network of thick pipes and conduits lined the ceiling, disappearing into the gloom. The hum was here. It was not an airborne sound anymore. It was a vibration conducted through the structure itself, a deep, thrumming resonance that they felt in the soles of their feet and the fillings of their teeth. It was stronger here, closer to its source. The machine was all around them. Ben was the last one off the ladder. He stumbled onto the platform, his face pale and clammy in the harsh glare of his headlamp. He immediately looked at his tablet, the cracked screen casting a faint, ghostly light on his features. "Okay," he said, his voice unsteady but regaining a sliver of its academic authority. "This is Tunnel Beta. It should run directly east for about 200 meters, then junction with the primary maintenance corridor. From there we can get to the central transmitter base." He was their guide now, his knowledge their only map in this subterranean maze. "And what about that thing?" Chloe whispered, her eyes wide as she stared back up the ladder into the darkness of the shaft. "The hatch is solid steel," Maya said, her voice tight with a confidence she clearly did not feel. "It will not get through." "Let us move." She took the lead, her headlamp beam cutting a path through the tunnel. Leo fell in behind her, followed by Chloe, with Ben taking up the rear, his eyes glued to the schematic on his tablet. Their progress was slow. The floor was uneven and treacherous, littered with debris and hidden pools of icy water that soaked their boots and sent a shocking cold up their legs. The air was stagnant and difficult to breathe. The whispers were here too. They were not the directed, intelligent chorus of the control room. Down here, they were a faint, incoherent static woven into the sound of the dripping water and the thrum of the hum. They were like the ghosts of voices, echoes trapped in the rock and concrete, and they were somehow more unnerving for their lack of focus. They slithered at the edge of hearing, promising madness. "Did you hear that?" Chloe stopped suddenly, her body rigid. "It is just water, Chloe," Leo said, placing a hand on her shoulder. She was trembling. "No," she said, her voice barely audible. It sounded like sketching. "The sound of my pencil." Leo's blood ran cold. He had not heard anything, but he did not doubt her for a second. The entity was a parasite of the mind, and it was beginning to feed on their individual fears. He swept his light across the damp tunnel walls, half expecting to see one of Chloe's monstrous drawings scrawled in the grime. The walls were blessedly empty. They pressed on, the tunnel twisting and turning. It was a disorienting, claustrophobic journey. There were no landmarks, just the repeating pattern of concrete, pipes and darkness. Their world had shrunk to the small, bobbing circles of light cast by their headlamps. The shadows they cast were monstrously long and distorted, leaping and dancing behind them like malevolent spirits. More than once, Leo spun around, convinced that his own shadow had moved independently. After what felt like an eternity, they came to a junction. A rusted metal sign, its letters almost completely obscured by decay, was bolted to the wall. Ben wiped the grime away with his sleeve. "Primary corridor," he announced, a note of relief in his voice. This new tunnel was larger, a main artery wide enough for a small maintenance cart. Thick, high-voltage cables, as thick as a man's arm, were suspended from the ceiling in heavy iron brackets. "The transmitter is this way," Ben said, pointing down the right-hand fork of the corridor. "Should be another 100 meters." As they entered the main corridor, they saw it. A thick, glistening trail of something black and viscous snaked along the floor, clinging to the base of the wall. It looked like tar, but it shimmered in their lights with an oily, iridescent sheen. It was inches wide, and it led in the direction they were headed. The air here was thick with a new smell, a foul, chemical stench like burnt plastic and rotten meat. "What is that?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling as she shrank back from the trail. "It is the creature," Leo said, his voice grim. "It has been using these tunnels." The realization was a punch to the gut. The hatch had not been a barrier. It had only sealed them in with the monster. They were not escaping it. They were following it. "It could be anywhere," Maya whispered, her knuckles white where she gripped her iron pipe. Her earlier bravado was gone, replaced by a tense, hunter's watchfulness. She was scanning the shadows ahead, her headlamp beam cutting back and forth. The hum was much louder in this corridor. They could feel the vibrations through the air now, a constant oppressive pressure on their chests, and the high-voltage cables above them were emitting a low, crackling sound. Leo pointed his electromagnetic field meter at them. The needle redlined instantly, shrieking a high-pitched alarm that he quickly silenced. "They are alive," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "There is a massive amount of power flowing through these lines. It is impossible, but it is happening." The machine was not just waking up, it was powering itself. The entity was somehow drawing energy from the ether, from the fabric of reality itself, and feeding its stolen vessel. They followed the black, viscous trail, their every step a study in terror. They moved in a tight cluster, back to back, their headlamps pointing in all directions, trying to pierce the suffocating darkness that pressed in on them. The corridor stretched on, a perfect straight line into blackness, creating the unnerving illusion that they were not moving at all, that they were simply walking in place while the tunnel scrolled past them. Then they heard it. It was not the hum and it was not the whispers. It was a new sound coming from the darkness far ahead, a wet rhythmic clicking. It was the sound the creature had made when it stepped into the control room, and it was accompanied by a heavy dragging scrape. It was in the tunnel with them, and it was close. "Lights out," Maya hissed, her voice a sharp crack in the darkness. "Now." 4 clicks, and they were plunged back into absolute blackness. The sudden absence of sight was terrifying, but it was their only chance. Their other senses were instantly heightened. The foul smell of the creature was stronger, carried on a faint cold draft. The clicking and scraping was louder, echoing off the concrete walls, making it impossible to tell exactly how far away it was. It sounded like it was just around the next bend. They flattened themselves against the cold, damp wall, trying to make themselves as small as possible. Leo held his breath until his lungs burned. He could hear Chloe's teeth chattering, a tiny, frantic sound that seemed as loud as a gunshot in the silence. Maya reached out and clamped a hand over Chloe's mouth, silencing the sound. Click, scrape, click, scrape. It was getting closer. A new sound joined the rhythm. A low, guttural breathing. A wet, ragged inhalation and exhalation that spoke of immense lungs and a diseased throat. Leo felt a primal, reptilian part of his brain take over, a part that knew only the absolute terror of a prey animal hiding from a predator in the dark. The creature was almost upon them. The scraping was deafening, the clicking sharp and percussive. Leo could feel the vibrations of its movement through the wall he was pressed against. It was huge. He risked opening his eyes, but it made no difference. The darkness was total. There was nothing to see. It passed them. A wave of profound cold washed over them, and the stench was overpowering, a gag-inducing wave of rot and ozone. The wet breathing was just feet away. Leo could hear the slick, sucking sound of its passage over the damp concrete. He fought down the urge to scream, to run, to do anything other than remain perfectly, impossibly still. The sounds began to recede down the corridor, back the way they had come. Click, scrape, click, scrape. It was moving away. It had not detected them. They waited in the suffocating darkness for a full 5 minutes after the last echo had faded, a silent, trembling tableau of terror. It was Ben who finally broke the silence, his voice a cracked whisper. "It is gone." Maya was the first to turn her light back on. The sudden beam was blinding. The others followed suit, their faces revealed as pale, sweat-streaked masks of shock. The black trail on the floor was thicker here, fresher, glistening wetly in their lights. "Let us go," Maya said, her voice hoarse, "before it decides to come back." They practically ran, stumbling through the darkness, their caution obliterated by a desperate, frantic need to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the creature. The hum grew steadily louder, the pitch rising until it was a deafening, soul-shaking roar that seemed to herald the end of the world. And then the tunnel ended. It opened into a vast, cavernous space. They stopped, breathless, on the threshold, their headlamp beams swallowed by the sheer immensity of the chamber. It was a circular room, at least 200 feet in diameter, with a soaring vaulted ceiling that was lost in the darkness above. The air here was warm and tasted of electricity. The group was at the base of the main dish. The entire chamber was a piece of alien machinery. In the center, a colossal metal pylon rose from the floor, the primary support for the dish far above. Surrounding it were enormous capacitor banks, humming transformers, and thick bundles of cables that snaked across the floor like the roots of a metal tree. And everything, every single piece of this dead, impossible machine was glowing. It was not a normal light. It was the same sickly, parasitic green they had seen on the star map. It pulsed from the capacitors, arced between the transformers, and flowed through the cables in visible, shimmering waves. The entity had turned the entire chamber into its heart, and it was pumping pure, raw power into the transmitter. They had reached their destination. They had found the source of the hum. It was infinitely more terrifying than they had ever imagined. They were no longer in a ruin. They were standing in the engine room of a nightmare, and it was seconds away from reaching full power. The chamber was a cathedral built to honor a dead and alien god. The pulsating green light was its stained glass, the deafening hum its choir. They stood on the precipice, four insignificant mortals staring into the belly of the beast, and it was a beast that was actively, ravenously feeding. Waves of energy, visible as shimmering distortions in the air, pulsed from the central pylon, washing over them. It felt like standing in a storm of pure information, a torrent of data so vast and complex it threatened to shred their minds. Leo felt a phantom nosebleed, the coppery taste of blood at the back of his throat. The schematics, Ben stammered, his eyes wide with a mixture of academic awe and primal terror. He held his cracked tablet up, the faint light of its screen a pathetic counterpoint to the malevolent glow of the chamber. The power is bypassing the primary breakers. It is feeding directly into the emitter assembly. It is a closed loop. We cannot just cut the power. There is no switch to flip. So what do we do? Maya yelled, her voice barely audible over the roar. She had her iron pipe held in a death grip, her gaze darting into the deep shadows that clung to the chamber's perimeter, expecting the creature from the tunnels to emerge at any moment. "There is a fail-safe," Ben shouted back, tracing a line on the schematic with a trembling finger. A last resort. The original engineers were paranoid. In case of a catastrophic power surge, there is a manual coolant release for the core. It would flash freeze the primary conduits, create a thermal break. It would kill the system dead. He looked up from the tablet, his face grim. But it is not electronic. It is a mechanical system, a series of heavy levers. They are on the central pylon, about 20 feet up. He pointed. A narrow, caged maintenance ladder was bolted to the side of the colossal metal column that formed the chamber's heart. It ascended into the glowing, thrumming darkness towards a small platform where a heavy-duty control box was just visible. It was their only hope. A single, desperate chance to pull the plug. The moment they committed to the plan, the entity seemed to sense their intent. The ambient whispers, which had been a background static, coalesced into a focused, psychic assault. This time, it did not speak their names, it spoke their fears. You will die in the dark, Maya, alone and forgotten. The voice was inside her head, a cold, clinical statement of fact. She staggered, shaking her head, the pipe feeling impossibly heavy in her hands. Your recordings will be your only legacy, Leo. No one will ever hear them. Your obsession is a monument to a wasted life. Leo cried out, clutching his head. The words struck a deeper chord of fear than any monster could. It was the voice of his own deep-seated insecurity, amplified 1,000 times. It is all just patterns, Chloe. There is no ghost, there is no God, just a chaotic signal, and your broken mind is the only one weak enough to listen. Chloe collapsed to her knees, her hands flying to her sketchbook. The charcoal pencil moved with a life of its own, a frantic, desperate scrawling. But she was not drawing monsters, she was writing. Page after page, she filled with the alien runic language from the monitors, her mind a helpless conduit for the entity's thoughts. Ben seemed to be the only one spared the direct assault. The entity did not speak to him. It showed him things. Images flashed behind his eyes, pulled from Albright's memories and the machine's own alien consciousness. Star charts of unknown galaxies, the swirling chaos of an alternate dimension, the terrified face of a man in a lab coat as he willingly gave himself to the machine. He stumbled, gasping, fighting for control of his own thoughts. It is trying to stop us, Maya roared, forcing herself forward, her rage a shield against the psychic attack. Ben, Leo, get to that ladder. I will cover you. Ben and Leo, spurred by her command, broke into a run towards the central pylon. They dodged sparking conduits and stepped over cables that vibrated with unimaginable power. The hum intensified with every step they took, the air growing hotter, the pressure building. They had almost reached the base of the ladder when it happened. From the deepest shadows behind a bank of humming transformers, a shape detached itself from the darkness. It was not a slow, shambling thing anymore. It was a predator unleashed. The creature from the tunnels burst into the green-lit arena, moving with a horrifying, unnatural speed. It was a grotesque collage of mismatched parts, its slick, black skin stretched over a frame that was both insectile and mammalian. A long, segmented arm ended in a wicked, bone-white scythe. It let out a chittering, screeching roar that cut through the mechanical hum, a sound of pure, biological hatred. It was between them and the ladder. Maya did not hesitate. With a battle cry that was more fury than fear, she charged, swinging the heavy iron pipe like a bat. Go, she screamed at the others over her shoulder. The creature swatted at her, its scythe-like limb whistling through the air. Maya ducked under the blow, the wind from its passage tearing at her hair. She slammed the pipe into one of its legs with a sickening wet crunch. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pain and rage, and stumbled. It gave them the opening they needed. Leo grabbed Ben's arm and pulled him towards the ladder. Ben, you have to tell me what to do when we get up there. The levers, Ben gasped, his eyes fixed on the battle raging behind them. They have to be pulled in sequence. 3, 1, 2. The numbers are painted on the housing. Leo started climbing, his hands slipping on the cold, vibrating rungs. Ben was right behind him. Below, the chamber had become a gladiatorial pit from a nightmare. Maya was a blur of motion, dodging and weaving, striking at the creature's limbs, but she was hopelessly outmatched. The creature was a whirlwind of black flesh and sharp bone, its every move a killing blow. It was only a matter of time. As Leo climbed, the entity's assault intensified. The walls of the chamber seemed to melt away, replaced by a swirling, nauseating vista of a dimension where the laws of physics were a cruel joke. Twisted crystalline structures grew and shattered in an instant, and colors that had no name bled through the air. He squeezed his eyes shut, focusing only on the rung in front of him, on the sound of Ben's breathing below him. They reached the platform, a small metal grate 20 feet above the floor. The control box was right there. It was an ancient, heavy-duty piece of machinery, its steel housing hot to the touch. 3 massive levers, each the size of a man's forearm, were set into its face, below the stenciled numbers 1, 2, and 3. 3, 1, 2, Ben yelled, his voice cracking. He was pointing down at the fight below. The creature had Maya cornered against a capacitor bank. It had swiped the pipe from her hands, sending it clattering across the floor. She was defenseless. Leo grabbed the third lever with both hands. It was incredibly stiff, as if it had not been moved in a century. He pulled, his muscles screaming in protest. With a loud, groaning screech of metal, the lever moved. A deep, shuddering vibration ran through the entire pylon. Below, the creature paused its attack on Maya. It tilted its eyeless head upwards, its body suddenly rigid, as if listening to a command. The green light in the chamber flickered. "It is working," Leo yelled. He lunged for the first lever. He threw his entire body weight against it. It moved, another deafening groan echoing through the chamber. A piercing, agonizing shriek erupted, but it was not from the creature. It was a psychic scream that came from the machine itself, from the entity. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. The lights in the chamber pulsed erratically, and arcs of white energy began to leap from the transformers, striking the walls. The system was becoming unstable. Just one more. The second lever. Leo reached for it, but a wave of vertigo washed over him so intensely that he fell to his knees. The entity was focusing all of its power on them, a last, desperate act of self-preservation. Ben scrambled past him, grabbing the final lever. "Together," he screamed. They both wrapped their hands around the cold steel and pulled. The lever resisted, fighting them with the full, impossible strength of the machine. The creature below let out a roar and charged at the base of the ladder, intent on bringing them down. Maya, seeing her chance, scrambled away, putting distance between herself and the fight. At that moment, Chloe let out a long, shuddering sigh from her place on the chamber floor. The stream of alien script she had been writing stopped. Her eyes cleared, focusing on the pylon with a terrible, lucid clarity. "It is not enough," she screamed, her voice echoing with a strange, otherworldly resonance. "The circuit is incomplete." Albright did not just pull the levers, he grounded it. He gave the energy a place to go. He became the failsafe. Ben looked from the struggling lever to the thick, unshielded power conduits that fed into the control box just inches from his hand. He looked down at the creature shaking the ladder, at Leo straining beside him, at Maya, bleeding but alive. He saw the truth in Chloe's eyes. He understood. "Leo," he said, his voice suddenly calm, the academic terror replaced by a profound, heart-breaking resolve. "Get down. Get them out." "What?" Leo gasped, not understanding. "We are almost there." "It needs a ground," Ben said simply. He let go of the lever. He looked at Leo, and in his eyes was the sad, quiet resignation of a man who had finally found the last missing piece of his research. He became the key. Before Leo could react, Ben placed one hand on the unshielded conduit and grabbed the final lever with the other. The effect was instantaneous. Ben's body became a conduit for 30 years of dormant alien power. A blinding flash of white light erupted from the pylon, turning the entire chamber into a sterile, overexposed photograph. Ben screamed, a sound that was consumed by the shriek of 1 billion volts of energy tearing through his body. The creature at the base of the ladder was caught in the discharge, its black flesh instantly incinerated, its screech of agony cut short as it was reduced to a pile of smoking ash. The hum, the choir of the machine god, died. It did not fade. It was violently extinguished, cut off in the middle of its crescendo. The pulsating green light vanished. The entire chamber was plunged into a deafening, shocking silence and a profound, terrifying darkness. The only light came from the flickering of their headlamps and the faint, cherry-red glow of dying, overloaded systems. Leo was thrown back by the force of the blast, his head hitting the steel cage of the ladder. He saw a charred silhouette etched onto the wall of the pylon where Ben had been standing. Then the darkness consumed him. Silence. It was a physical thing, a crushing weight that replaced the all-consuming hum. Leo's first coherent thought was that the silence was louder than the noise had ever been. It filled the vast chamber, pressing in on him, amplifying the frantic thumping of his own heart. His head throbbed, a dull, concussive ache from where he had struck the ladder. The air tasted of ozone and ash. He pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. The beam from his headlamp cut a weak, trembling swath through the profound darkness. The chamber was dead. The malevolent green glow was gone. The shimmering energy fields had collapsed. The transformers were inert chunks of metal. The only light came from their 3 headlamps, painting small, nervous circles in the oppressive gloom. On the pylon above, a blackened scorch mark was the only testament to Ben's existence. A dark silhouette burned into the steel. Ben, the archivist, had become the final, terrible entry in Whisperwood's logbook. Leo's stomach heaved, and he choked back a wave of nausea and grief. He could not afford to break. Not yet. He swung his legs over the side of the platform and began the slow, painful climb down. Every rung was an agony. his body a symphony of bruises. When his boots hit the concrete floor, Maya was there. Her face was streaked with grime and blood from a cut on her forehead, but her eyes were clear and hard. She helped steady him. A few feet away, Chloe was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth silently. She had her sketchbook clutched in her hands like a holy relic. She was staring at the pile of greasy ash that had been the creature, her expression terrifyingly blank. "He is gone," Leo said, the words feeling like shards of glass in his throat. Maya just nodded, her jaw tight. There was nothing to say. Ben had saved them. He had become the ground, the key, the final sacrifice to shut the machine down. They were alive because he was a shadow on a wall. "We have to go," Maya said, her voice a raw whisper. "We have to get out of here before something else happens." There was no argument. The silence of the chamber was not a peaceful one. It was the silence of a tomb, the expectant hush of a predator holding its breath. Leo went to Chloe and gently touched her shoulder. "Chloe, we are leaving." She did not seem to hear him at first. Then slowly, she looked up, her eyes unfocused. "It is quiet," she whispered, her voice a child's. "It is finally quiet." She allowed Leo to help her to her feet, but she moved like an automaton, her limbs stiff and uncoordinated. They found Maya's iron pipe lying near the ash pile, and she picked it up, its familiar weight a small comfort. They cast one last look at the dead, silent heart of the machine, then turned their backs on it and entered the yawning black mouth of the tunnel. The journey back was a different kind of horror. Before, the tunnels had been filled with a tangible threat, the hum, the whispers, the creature. Now, the threat was the absence. The silence was a canvas onto which their terrified minds painted new nightmares. Every drip of water was a footstep. Every gust of cold air from a ventilation shaft was the passing of a phantom. Their headlamp beams seemed to push back the darkness by mere inches, and the vast, impenetrable blackness on all sides felt alive and watchful. They moved slowly, huddled together. Maya took the lead, pipe at the ready. Leo was in the middle, his arm around Chloe, guiding her stumbling steps. They did not speak. Words were an intrusion, a violation of the tomb-like silence. They were intruders here, and they knew it. Halfway back down the primary corridor, Chloe stopped dead. She pulled away from Leo, her head cocked as if listening to a faint sound. "What is it?" Maya hissed, spinning around, her light cutting wildly through the dark. "I thought I heard..." "Sketching," Chloe murmured, her brow furrowed in confusion. But it was so faint, like it was very far away. Leo's blood turned to ice. He swept his own light across the walls, his heart hammering against his ribs. There was nothing, just damp concrete and mold. He put his arm back around Chloe. "It is just an echo, Chloe," he said, his voice sounding hollow and unconvincing even to himself. "There is nothing here." She allowed him to lead her on, but the spell of the blank automaton was broken. Now she was jumpy, her head constantly turning, her eyes darting into the shadows beyond their lights. The entity might have been silenced, its connection to the array severed, but it had touched their minds. It had planted seeds of fear, and in this suffocating darkness, those seeds were beginning to sprout. They reached the junction and turned into the narrower access tunnel. It felt even more claustrophobic than before. This was where the creature had passed them, a memory that made the hairs on Leo's arms stand on end. He kept expecting to see its hulking shape emerge from the darkness ahead, to hear that wet clicking scrape. They finally saw the bottom of the ladder, a promise of escape from the crushing confines of the earth. Maya went first, climbing with a grim determination. Leo helped Chloe onto the first rung, then followed close behind her, his hands on her waist to steady her. As he climbed, he looked down one last time into the blackness of the tunnel. For a single, heart-stopping second, he thought he saw a flicker of faint green light, a spark of the machine's malevolent energy, wink and disappear in the far distance. He blinked, and it was gone. A trick of the eye, a frayed nerve. It had to be. They pushed open the heavy access hatch. The clang of it hitting the concrete floor of the control room was a deafening, profane sound after the long silence. They scrambled out, one after another, into the familiar wrecked space. And there was light. Pale grey morning light filtered through the high grimy windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was the most beautiful thing Leo had ever seen. The control room was a disaster zone. The main doors were gone, twisted scraps of metal. The console was dark, the monitors blank. The star map was just a dead, empty grid. The throne of the entity was vacant. They stood there for a long moment, breathing the dusty air, letting the faint light wash over them. They were survivors. They had walked through hell and come out the other side, but there was no triumph, no relief. They were hollowed out, haunted by the ghost of a sound and the memory of a friend who was now just a scorch mark on a wall. The walk out of the facility was a blur. They did not look back. The forest seemed different, the trees no longer menacing, the air no longer heavy with unspoken dread. It was just a forest, quiet and indifferent in the morning mist. The world they had left behind, what felt like a lifetime ago, was slowly reasserting itself. They reached the clearing. The car was there, a solid, mundane object from a world that no longer seemed entirely real. It was untouched, covered in a thin layer of dew. The sight of it was so normal, so incongruous with the nightmare they had endured, that it was almost jarring. Maya unlocked the doors, and they collapsed inside. Chloe curled up in the back seat, her eyes closing almost immediately, her sketchbook resting on the seat beside her. Maya slumped into the passenger seat, resting her head against the window, her face a mask of utter exhaustion. Leo got behind the wheel. His hands trembled as he put the key in the ignition. The engine turning over was a sudden, violent intrusion of normalcy. He put the car in gear and began the slow, careful drive down the overgrown access road, away from Whisperwood, away from the hum. They drove in silence for miles, the only sound the crunch of gravel under the tires. The sun was higher now, breaking through the trees. It was over. They had survived. As they reached the main road, the smooth asphalt was a welcome change. Leo glanced in the rearview mirror, checking on Chloe. She seemed to be asleep. His eyes fell on her sketchbook, lying open on the seat. He could see the pages from here, covered in the frantic alien script she had channeled in the transmitter chamber. His curiosity, the archivist's instinct that had brought him here, got the better of him. "Can I see that?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Maya did not answer, her eyes closed. Leo reached back and carefully picked up the sketchbook, balancing it on the steering wheel. He flipped through the last few pages, the dense, meaningless runes a testament to the horror that had possessed his friend. He reached the final page she had worked on. It was filled with the same alien script, a torrent of otherworldly information. But at the very bottom of the page, separated from the script by a small gap, were 2 lines written in English. The handwriting was Chloe's own, a neat, careful print, completely unlike the frantic scrawls above it. 2 simple sentences that made his blood run cold, and the fragile silence of the morning shatter into a million pieces. "It is quiet now. It is listening.